Welcome to the Pursuing Points podcast, where it's all about the pursuit of credit card points and miles today so that you can travel the world free of charge tomorrow. And now, your host, Peter Foti.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 8th Pursuing Points podcast. I am your host, as always, Peter Foti, and I am joined today by a very special guest, Mrs. Becky Pokora of thegirlandglobe.com. Becky, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you tonight?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you very much for agreeing to come on the show here. I think this is going to be pretty fun.
Awesome.
So can you just kind of get started and just tell the audience who you are and what the Girl and Globe is and sort of how you got into this travel blogging sort of space?
Sure. So I am based in Richmond, Virginia. I'm a pretty frequent traveler. I'd say I'm at about 12 weeks a year right now, which is awesome. And pretty lucky. But I started blogging back in 2011. At the time, I was actually writing about miles and points, and I was writing on boarding area for a while, and I just kind of noticed that my travels were taking me farther and farther away from just airfare and hotels, so I migrated over to the Girl and Globe. So these days, I write more about travel in general. I try and get a new twist everywhere I go compared to what other people are doing. But I still do use miles and points to fund it. I just don't limit myself to opportunities if it isn't something that I can get for free.
Sure. So that 12 weeks a year that you're traveling, is that all personal travel, or do you have a job that allows you to travel?
Some of it is work. I do some marketing consulting, usually for the travel industry and tourism in general. When I do travel for work, I try to tack on some extra time on my own just because it's a really good opportunity to go out and see some things. But a very good portion of it is just personal leisure travel.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And, so you kind of mentioned that you got out of the miles and points stuff, doing something a little bit more unique. And for anyone who hasn't checked out thegirlandglobe.com, it is super unique. I was browsing through your getting started sort of page and reading about some of the things that you've done. And you coined this term of SightDoing. So can you just explain what SightDoing is, and then maybe we can talk about some specific experiences?
Sure. So I define SightDoing as more of an immersive or experiential way of seeing the world. So I try to look for interactive and hands-on ways to try new things. It can be anything from classes and workshops to just trying to be more involved with local communities. Basically, it's just getting away from the bus tours and the museums. Every once in a while, they still make my agenda, but for a lot of the time, I'm just trying to have that personal connection with the culture. And the way I do that is by getting involved.
So was there like a specific moment for you? Like how long had you been traveling purely as just a sightseeing tourist? And then what was sort of the inflection point where you realized that you can get a lot more out of your travels by being a little bit more active?
I think one of the main drivers was I took a trip to Portland, Oregon, which is a cool city in its own right. But pretty much everything that I did there had absolutely nothing to do with anything I was interested in. And I came home after a 5-day trip to what should have been an awesome city. And I said, that kind of felt like a waste of 5 days and all of the money and the time and the effort that went into it. So I said I really had to change my outlook as soon as I was planning things to make sure that I was doing something that was meaningful and interesting and memorable to me. So I think that was kind of when I started getting into it. I wouldn't say that I knew it was SightDoing or something specific, but it was definitely a turning point in when I thought I'd put more time and energy into planning the trip to something directly for myself.
Yeah. And so when you started this SightDoing process, how do you go about finding or choosing the activities that you're ultimately going to do when you get to these new places?
Some of them are obvious, which is great. Just people in general are looking for more experiences and activities when they're traveling. So there are some advertisements and guidebook recommendations that make it easy, but I do a lot of scouring the internet. I have a whole list of bookmarks of places that are usually really small startups that haven't caught on to a lot of attention, or some very local, one-of-a-kind places where sometimes you can find things, but Honestly, a lot of it is asking around. And some of the things that I've done have not necessarily been advertised as such, but if you can see something that you know a town is known for, a lot of times you can just start asking people in that field. And if they're passionate about what they're doing, they're more than happy to kind of create a one-of-a-kind, unique experience for you.
Sure. So, I mean, do you think it takes a lot of time to sort of plan these sight doing trips? Or, I mean, when it all comes out in the wash, is it more or less equivalent to the time you may have spent previously planning like a trip to the museum or a bus trip or anything like that?
I would say it takes more time. I would also say that I overdo it. I love to plan. I love the reading and the research that goes along with it. So to me, that's not a downside. So I know I put even more energy than is probably required to make that happen.
Yeah.
But you're also probably not just going on Wikipedia 20 minutes before you board your plane and figuring it out either. You do need to put a little bit of time and effort into it. I find that it pays off, but everybody will have a different break-even point.
Sure. So as I was looking at some of the sight doing experiences that you've embarked upon, the three that sort of stood out to me the most were, so first had to be the volcano boarding. I mean, were you nervous at all that this thing was going to actually erupt while you were up there?
I was not. People in Central America, so this was in Nicaragua, and in Central America in general, the locals seem to have a good feeling for when things are worrisome and when they're not. I don't know. Maybe I'm too trusting.
Yeah.
But even though you could feel some heat vents and see some smoke and things rising, it wasn't like there was lava actively flowing down the side of the volcano, and there hadn't been a huge eruption in a number of years. So I took my chances. It was a lot of fun. Hopefully that was the right call for anybody else who chooses to do it.
Yeah. I'll definitely be linking the articles that you've written about this in the show notes in various places. So if anyone who hasn't seen it, I can check it out. But I thought that was super interesting. I honestly had never even heard of volcano boarding before. I didn't know that was something that anybody had ever done. But I mean, it seemed like fun. I actually grew up in the Northeast, so I'm familiar with snow and I've done a lot of sledding. Sounds like it might be similar, but I guess it's still sort of like a once in a lifetime experience.
Yeah, definitely.
The next one that I really liked, because it sounds like your husband and I share a fear of heights, was I'm not sure how to pronounce this exactly, is it the Via Ferrata climb?
Yes. Yeah, so Via Ferrata actually translates to Iron Way. So that's why it looks like weird words to you, just because it's not in English.
Yeah. And so where was that and what was that? And so you can sort of like describe that scenario a little bit.
Yeah, so basically what it is iron rings that are basically like stapled or drilled into the side of a cliff. So you can go rock climbing per se without necessarily knowing the advanced rock climbing techniques. They're a crutch to help you get from the top to the bottom. And I've done three of them now. The best one was definitely the one that I did in Switzerland, just because the views were spectacular in addition to the activity being really fun. Or at least it was fun for me. My husband is terrified of heights, so he thought it was like the worst 2 hours of his life, but he made it to the top anyway, and just made me promise I'd never make him do that again.
Yeah, when I was looking at the pictures of it, you had the one picture from the bottom where you can see those rings that you referred to as sort of being stapled in there. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, this doesn't look too bad. And then I saw your picture, I think it was like from maybe the top, and maybe your husband was still a little ways down, and it looked like quite a fall. So I was like, I don't know if I'd be into that.
Yeah, so you don't actually have a harness or anything. It's just you and two carabiners hooked into this cliff. So you have to be pretty confident in both yourself and your ability.
Yeah, well, you know what? I guess if and when you make it to the top, that's a pretty good story, right?
I think so.
And then lastly, and I guess for some people, maybe this isn't the most exciting thing, but I've always found snorkeling to be pretty fun. You went snorkeling in Hawaii. When was that?
I went to Hawaii, specifically the Big Island, in March 2014, and I did a lot of snorkeling. I did some from shore. I did one snorkel trip with dolphins, which was really just amazing to see some of these dolphins in the water beneath you. You have to keep somewhat of a distance, which is better for the animals, obviously, instead of sneaking up on them and trying to touch them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just incredible to see them underwater. Every once in a while, when you're above water, you see them pop up. But to see them in their natural habitat is great. But even some of the reef snorkeling I did by catamaran was also amazing. I've been lucky to snorkel in a lot of different places in the world. And off the Big Island, there's some just really colorful reefs and lots of tropical fish. And I know that sounds stereotypical, but sometimes that's what you want.
Yeah, no, that sounds awesome. So when you're doing all this and you're sight doing, you're not necessarily sightseeing. Obviously, you take pictures for your blog, but how often do you find yourself like taking pictures or recording videos on your phone, for instance, doing these things as opposed to, I guess, just doing them and, people say that like live for the moment or whatever. Like, is that part of your strategy with all of this, or is that not really part of it?
It really depends. Some of it is whether or not it's convenient to pull out a phone or a video for a moment. Obviously, if you're climbing a mountain, it can be a little bit more difficult than if you're doing a cooking class and you just want to pause for a second to take a picture. I personally think that photographs are less intrusive than video. I mean, with a video, you're literally standing there for 30 seconds or more to try and get a clip versus a photo. You can take a snap and move on. And I know that some of my photos suffer because of it, because I'm just trying to take the picture and then get back to the moment. So it is a little bit of a balance for me. And there's some things that I've done that will never get written about on my blog because either they didn't turn out to be a great story or I don't have any pictures to back it up. But that doesn't mean it's not going to be something that I don't get to remember forever.
Right, exactly. That's probably the way to do it. So we talked about a very, very small subset of some of your recent travels, Central America, Switzerland, Hawaii. Where are you headed next?
I actually clicked the buy button this afternoon for a trip to Peru, so that's really exciting. Oh. I've been talking about it for a really long time, but it just kind of came to fruition this very afternoon. So I'm psyched for that. It's not really planned. It's just booked. But other than that, I have a lot of maybes. And then my one annual big trip that I take a year will be to Vietnam in February, which is also really exciting. I try to plan one trip a year that gets planned months and months in advance and gets that kind of research and energy that I was talking about. Some of the other ones kind of get thrown together. So that's been the big one on my radar for a while.
So for the Peru trip, was that just sort of you saw a great deal and you just sort of had to take advantage of it, or how did that come about?
I wish I could say it was a great deal. My sister and I try and travel together every year as an excuse to get together. And this year, the only time she has off is between Christmas and New Year's. So there's no such thing as a cheap airfare that particular week of the year.
Right.
So it is what it is. But that's okay. And we've been talking about Peru for a number of years. And every single year we haven't booked it because we've instead chosen somewhere that is on sale or does have that kind of special deal around it. So this year, when we said there isn't going to be a deal anywhere anyway, we might as well just pay full price. This was the year it finally made the top of the list.
Nice. And so as far as the Vietnam trip goes, you said it's in February and you're in the planning process. What exactly does that look like? Like if someone wanted to do like a sight doing trip, and they wanted to plan, the next trip for themselves, what does your process look like that they might be able to take some tips from?
Yeah, so I usually start my favorite website to kind of get that overview with is wikivoyage.org. It's basically Wikipedia for travel guides. And it's all crowdsourced information. So you never know what you're going to find. Sometimes it's awesome and sometimes it's very much lacking. But I like to look there because since there's no barrier to entry, anybody can post anything. You kind of get a few different ideas. But after that, in Southeast Asia, one of my favorite places to look for sight doing is Backstreet Academy, which basically consolidates tours from these small one-off vendors that might not have the money to make their own website or their own marketing budget. So they kind of consolidate that information, and you do get a lot of strange hands-on activities, everything from fruit carving to basket making. So that's a fun place. But
And you said that was backstreetacademy.com?
Backstreet Academy. Yeah, I think it's .com and not Yeah, it's .com.
Okay.
So
yeah, well, I'll make sure we'll put that in the show notes if anyone wants to take a look at it.
Yeah, but they pride themselves in traveling differently, so it goes right along with my personal approach. The only problem is right now they're basically only in a few select Asian countries, so if you're not going to that part of the world, it's not very helpful for you.
Mm-hmm. And so with these trips, like with the Vietnam trip, obviously Peru, you said that you guys just went ahead and paid for the most expensive ticket. How often do you find yourself redeeming points and miles to get to these places rather than paying cash, or how does that really break down for you?
Sure. So Vietnam happens to be a mileage trip. And part of that is because this will be with my husband, and he has this self-declared rule that if a flight is over 8 hours, it has to be in business class. I don't know how he got to be that way. I'm sure I bought him a business class ticket once, and he said, well, that's that.
Guess what? That's a good rule. Our last guest on the podcast, AJ Crow of MileageMayhem.com, quoted Seinfeld. I guess the scenario is that Jerry and Elaine were set to get on a plane. They had 2 tickets, one in first class, one in coach, and they said, how are we going to decide this? And Jerry just looked at her and said, Elaine, I've flown first class before. Like once, I guess just once you do it, you just can't go back, right? So I guess it makes sense.
So, I mean, admittedly, it is a pretty long flight to get over to Asia, and he is 9 inches taller than me, so I'll give him that as a good argument as well. But part of that was also because I just wanted to get in one last hurrah with American Airlines miles before their devaluation. So I booked last March, which is why it's now in February for the actual trip. I was just trying to book out as far as I could.
Yeah.
So that'll be fun.
So how many points did that? So was that like a Saver award on American?
Yeah, that was a Saver award in business class. So it was 110,000 miles per person round trip. And we'll be flying Japan Airlines in one direction and Cathay Pacific in the other. I haven't flown either one of those airlines before, but I've heard great things. So I don't know if my expectations are a little bit too high right now, but it should be a good way to get there at the very least.
Yeah, I've heard, I've never flown on either carrier either, but I've heard from previous guests as well as just general blog posts that they're both pretty solid. So that's pretty cool. So 220,000 points total. How do you generally accrue points? I mean, we can talk a little bit about what cards are in your wallet, but I guess just more generally, is it through flying a lot, or is it more through credit card spend and things like that?
It's been mostly credit card spend. I actually bought a house this past spring. So for the last couple of months, or probably even a year or two, my actual applications were pretty quiet just because I wanted to keep that credit report as clean and neat for the banks as possible.
Sure.
So there were a few sign-up bonuses in there, but a lot of it was just typical spending. I am lucky I do have a business, so I have some business expenses with that. And my husband and I both travel for work sometimes, so that helps a little bit as well. We're probably the only people where the new rules on earning or accruing miles is actually helpful based on spend rather than mileage flown, just because corporate travel tends to have those more last-minute expensive fares.
Right.
So I've actually been kind of smiling to myself. I'm sorry to everybody else, but I've been smiling the last month or two as I've seen those mileage balances rack up a lot faster than they used to. Hopefully that means another trip in my future.
And so do you have status on any airline right now?
Barely. I have gold with American. Silver with Delta. They're nothing to write home about. I guess they're better than nothing, but I certainly wouldn't advise anyone to go out of their way to get to that low-level status. Mine just kind of happens out of coincidence.
Right. Yeah, that's always interesting. Was that like a conscious decision not to stick to a specific airline? Or, I mean, I know that you said it just sort of happened, but I mean, if you could go back, would you do anything differently or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. I book primarily on price and secondarily on schedule, or sometimes schedule wins over price. It just depends. But usually out of my small airport of Richmond, Virginia, there's a clear winner based on price and schedule where airline doesn't even come in to be a factor at play. Yeah. So I choose what I think will be the best experience on any given flight versus trying to chase that status. It works for me. Somebody who's used to making more changes on their flights or really wants those upgrades, they might have different priorities. But I think where I am, I save money in the long run. And if I do need to pay for those upgrades later, I'm still making out ahead.
Sure. Yeah, that's one of the things about, I think, just travel blogging in general. We tend to sort of ascribe like a one-size-fits-all solution when in reality, everyone's goals and what the things that they value are just different. So for me, I mean, I value those domestic upgrades pretty highly. I mean, I'm a big guy and that's important to me. So I choose that over most other things. But certainly if that's not that important to you, or if you're flying mainland regional jets that don't even have first class, I guess that wouldn't matter either. So it just kind of all depends, I guess.
Sure.
So going back a little bit to what's in your wallet, I guess the one card that I've been asking every co-host about is, of course, the Sapphire Reserve. This is like, I think it's like the first time I can ever remember where a credit card has gotten this much like mainstream media attention.
Right.
Which is always super interesting. I mean, I've been talking to my friends and family about credit cards for years, and now they're seeing it on national news, which is always interesting. But did you sign up for and were you approved for the Sapphire Reserve?
So I did sign up for it, and it initially went to pending, like I think it did for a lot of people. And then I got a nice little notice that I was denied. So I had to call up reconsideration and talk to them. So basically, I was at five cards in 24 months already, so that would make it number 6. But 2 of those cards were authorized users, so I was able to make my case. And I figured I really had very little to lose. There weren't a lot of other cards I was excited about, so the inquiry wasn't a huge deal for me, especially since, like I said, I had been quiet for the last couple of months and didn't already have a ton of inquiries on my report. So I took a chance. I'm glad it worked out. I applied for the ink on the same day, which is super, super risky. I've been denied for that twice before. I don't know why Chase doesn't like me. I have a legitimate business, and you would think that they want to give me that card, but they don't. I'm assuming I'll get yet a third denial, but here's hoping.
That's super interesting. So is the Girl and Globe your main business as far as that card goes? Because I know a lot of bloggers recommend, or at least they have in the past, I'm not sure if they still recommend this, but signing up for business credit cards with your blog as sort of your main business, and then using your social security number as the EIN or whatever. Is that still sort of a typical process for these business cards? I've never actually had a business card, so I'm not totally sure how they work.
So I actually did it in exactly that way with an Amex Gold business card several years ago, using my blog as my business, which I was making, I don't know, $800 or $1,000 in a year at that point. So it was just a social security number, and Amex approved me. Inc. did not. So more recently, I do have an actual registered LLC in the state of Virginia with an EIN, an actual income and revenue to report. And that's my marketing consulting business that I do. So it is outside of my blog. And probably more in line with what banks think of when they say a small business.
Yeah, that's weird. We got to get you approved for that. I hope someone from Chase is listening, although I seriously doubt it. But if they are, you should approve Becky. So how is it? So you've not gotten any sort of response yet for that one?
It went pending. I'm waiting to hear an official response before I touch that one again.
Okay. And what are some of the other cards that you've got in your wallet that maybe are your daily drivers or ones that maybe you signed up for a sign-up bonus and you plan on canceling? Or can you just sort of give a high-level overview of what's in your wallet?
Yeah, I think I have 7 or 8 cards total. Honestly, I haven't counted them. The ones that sit in my wallet, I have a American Express Blue Cash Preferred. I use that for gas and groceries just because it is a pretty high cash back amount, and because I spend a lot of money in those categories. So I do try to max that out as much as I can.
Mm-hmm.
I also have a Citi Double Cash card that's just straight cash back as well, 2%. I like cash back because I buy a lot of my airfare the old-fashioned way. I do a lot of travel in the U.S., and they're usually economy tickets. So for me, 2% cash back can actually be a pretty good return compared to getting miles and redeeming them within the U.S. I also have, I have a Freedom card that gets pulled out when it's relevant in those 5X categories.
Mm-hmm.
I have an American Airlines and a United Airlines branded card. Those kind of just sit in the drawer. But I still have them, and they seem to get fees waived every year. So I've actually had those for quite a while now.
Nice. Yeah, I tried to cancel my American Citi co-branded card. And I wasn't able to get the fee waived. I was able to get, I think, 7,500 points after like $1,000 in spend in 3 months or something like that.
Sure.
Which basically worked out for me. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the things that, the first thing people always say is that you should never cancel a credit card. Or, well, friends of mine or family members that aren't necessarily as interested in, or maybe they're not as educated about credit cards, tend to say that you should never cancel a card, which I've tried to write extensively about because there's just a lot of misinformation. But if you're going to try and cancel it, you should always ask for some sort of retention, right? I mean, how often do you find yourself doing stuff like that?
I call every year for every card. A lot of times I either get it waived or, like you said, some sort of a bonus where it makes sense to keep it another year, even if it's not exactly a cash fee waiver. But some of these cards, like the Freedom and the Double Cash card, I mean, those are no fee cards anyway. So, of course, they're going to stay in my wallet for a long time.
Right. Are there any other cards to report, or is that pretty much, does that round it out?
I have a Capital One card that I got way back in 2004. It also kind of sits in a drawer, so I'm not sure that's very exciting, but it is my oldest card, so I like to keep that one and pull it out every once in a while to show activity.
For sure. So, but at a high level, you're sounds like you're more interested in earning cash back because you generally buy your tickets just paying cash, which maybe works out better in the long run from a mathematical perspective. And then so what do you plan on? You've got the Sapphire Reserve, obviously, and those 100,000 points on that sign-up bonus. Do you have any sort of redemption in mind for stuff like that? Or how would you generally use Ultimate Rewards points?
Yeah, so that card will probably go, like I said, I try and take one big trip a year. So I'm sure that Sapphire Reserve will play right into whatever the next big trip is. I guess that would be probably the end of 2017 or early 2018, which just sounds crazy to me to even be talking that far out.
Yeah.
So those miles will get used for a more traditional way of those business class redemptions, trying to go somewhere farther, somewhere with a little bit more luxury and make it more of an event, I guess, rather than just my typical travel.
Sure. Well, awesome. So we've been going for about 29 minutes. I'm trying to start something new with the podcast where I ask 3 questions at the end. You're actually the guinea pig. You're going to be the first one. So hopefully this works out well.
All right.
And we're going to try to go like rapid fire, sort of first thing that comes to mind. But feel free to elaborate a little bit if you'd like to.
Okay.
So the first question is, what is the place that you'd most like to visit that you've not yet been?
I think New Zealand. South Africa's up there too, but New Zealand might edge it out.
Nice. Those are both very high on my list as well. Number 2, what is your favorite credit card, regardless of any sign-up bonus that it may or may not have?
I think the Sapphire. It used to be the Sapphire Preferred. Maybe the Reserve will bump that out. But
Yeah. It's sad to see the preferred was the golden goose for so long, and now everyone's just kind of over it. I mean, I feel the same way, obviously, but what are you going to do?
We'll see.
And then lastly, what is one piece of advice for someone that wants to travel and experience a little bit more like you find yourself doing?
I would say that you have to kind of stop forcing something specific. A lot of my really great travel experiences have been because I went somewhere that I wasn't planning on going. Whether that means I booked an airfare deal that otherwise wouldn't have been on the top 10 of my list, or even when I'm in a location, if I find out about something while I'm there. I do excessively plan things, but I also change my plans at a whim. So even though I might go with a binder full of information, I don't necessarily follow it.
Yeah. So spontaneity. You got to just
a little bit.
Go with the flow. I like that. That's cool. All right, cool. Well, so like I said, I'm going to have a lot of links to Becky and her website, as well as some of the stuff she mentioned in the show notes. Is there anything that you wanted to leave us with? Where can people find you on like social media and stuff like that?
Pretty much any platform you think of. I am at the Girl in Globe. So wherever your favorite is, I am on Twitter, probably the most, but you'll find me on other platforms as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And guess what? I feel like this went super well. So maybe we can have you back in the future after you get back from Vietnam or Peru or something like that.
Well, thank you. I'll keep it in mind.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.